All right. Well, Vince and Dave, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me here today.
Thank you.
Um, so maybe I'll let you guys kind of introduce, what you are, who you are, and what you're doing, and who you're helping in the world. But we were talking the other day about leadership, and the question I asked was, if we got together, what are the things leaders aren't doing? And you came up with three pretty good ones: diverting, learning, and apprenticeships. And so I thought maybe we could dig into those today a little bit, and maybe just give people a quick, maybe starting with Vince, a quick who you are, and what where you're coming from, experience and point of view, and all that.
Okay, I'm Vince Racioppo. My work has been entirely working with leaders who want to improve their performance of their team, themselves, grow their skills. One of the things that Dave and I've been working on a lot lately is this idea that many leaders are diverted away from where they should be doing work, where they're not doing the work that they should be doing because of the level of capability and competency that sits around other folks in their organization. So a lot of the work that we do, that I've been doing lately, is helping raise those capabilities and competencies of the people around the leaders.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I'm Dave Massello. As Vince pointed out, this idea of how much time people in leadership positions and high performers have to divert from what they were supposed to be doing off to save somebody else's project or operational situation. And it's because in large measure that we really have an interesting way of developing people in leadership. The most powerful leadership training programs we have in this country, physicians, commercial pilots or military pilots, electricians, plumbers, all use a mentor-apprentice approach to development.
Sure.
Come with me and I'll show you what to do. In leadership, we tend to use the deep end of the pool model. We give you 3 or 4 days of training, a manual to read, and then say, good luck, and we'll check in with you every week to see what mistakes you made. It is totally counter to the development processes we really know drive development.
Right.
And what happens is because of that, we have so many people that are in the, I wonder if they're learning it model, that the business results we're after really don't care. They want competency, and we're not giving it to them. So what Vince and I are trying to do is we're finding ways to help leaders down in the operations of the business learn how to be the mentor-apprentice support to the people around them so they can drive this development process. That's what we're trying to do.
I'm curious because the two lines of questioning that came up as you guys were setting this idea up for me was one, I'm curious to your knowledge and your experience, how much of the diverting is perceived lack of competency? That is, they could be delegating and giving this away to people, but they're just not. They're holding onto it too tight. And for the things that really are challenges of competency, maybe talk about what are the key things you think that those new leaders are missing that you focus on at the top of your priorities in terms of what you're teaching.
That's an interesting question. You want to start, Vince? Yeah.
That's a great question. And one of the clients with whom we worked filled out a little form that we have. It's just a little form to understand how are you spending your time as compared to the time that you find valuable as opposed to time you're fixing things that were broken.
Right.
Okay. And he came back that 50% of his time was spent fixing things that should never have occurred. And another client when we worked with, that he was selling $4,000 an hour when he was out selling. Okay. He was one of the chief people in the organization. But when you looked at what he was actually doing, half of his time was spent taking those orders and making sure they got through the system of the organization. And so the amount of time wasted, so at least 20 hours a week was spent, and he was leaving what's that, about $80,000
Yeah.
on the table every week because he's spending time doing things he shouldn't have been doing. Now,
Yeah.
what the organization did was hire some people that were a lot less expensive than this guy
Mhm.
and started helping them manage more of the projects. But we find that diversion happens organically. It's not something that people think about. It just happens because, as Dave says, that you get rewarded. I think, Dave, I mean, when you were earlier in your career, you were like the rock star when you came in there to fix the problems, right? Well, you literally had a guitar and a piano that you played.
Oh, that's true. I was trained up as a fix-it guy.
Yeah.
Even though I was the financial officer, what I got trained to do was to go in and deal with the multitude of situations where the human content had gone off the rails. And
Yeah.
that's what's interesting about the problem solving when these leaders are diverted. They're not necessarily diverted because of some technical issue. They're diverted because the organization isn't getting along with itself. There's something misfiring that is dragging down productivity, throughput. It's pushing the error rates higher. It's an odd thing that even with highly skilled people. So I come out of the healthcare world, right? So
Yeah.
all the clinical side is certified so they know what it is they're supposed to be doing. But what happens to them is they get into situations where it's not a clinical issue. It's the running of the business issue.
Right.
And they don't have the skill set. They don't know how to do that. So I was rewarded. I was considered, one of the golden boys, put that in quotes, of my days in the hospital world, because they could literally throw me into the middle of any briar patch and I would figure a way to get everybody out of there. What I never did, though, and what I think has been driving our work for years, is what I never did nor was asked to do, was to deal with the fundamental problem that created the situation in the first place.
Exactly.
Which was local leadership didn't have the capacity or the skills that I had been given to fix the problems or just prevent them from happening in the first place.
And I have to imagine they kept coming back too, right? Because if you just fix it once and go away, whatever led to it is going to create the same problem again sometime later, right?
It did. And I'm no fool. I knew that was job security. I mean, the more...
Of course. Of course.
Yeah, the more problems that you had, the more
Yeah.
secure your job was. And so
Right.
now we didn't want to go start making those problems, but wanted to go fix.
You didn't have to make them. That was the beauty of it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. And
right.
I don't know how many times we've seen that over and over. And now here's another downside of that process. When you see managers who are trying to run a department, you see it in the consulting world, and that's your world too, Mike, is that you see utilization rates go down for the leaders who are training up the new people or getting people up to a competency level in their organization. It diverts their time away. We've seen in clients where they're supposed to have a 70% utilization go down to 50% because they're turning over people.
Yeah.
And they're turning over people for other reasons because they're not training them. And people are leaving. And I know you've got a lot of young folks in your organization. Right. And if you don't train them, if you don't grow them, they're like a flash out that elevator door, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll be gone.
Right.
I'm curious, when you guys are coaching people, I wonder, is there any sort of, because, Dave, you mentioned something, and I feel like I used to do this too. It's fun and rewarding and self-gratifying to solve those problems, right? And And is there maybe an ego thing that you have to let go of that so that the organization can grow and learn? Is that an obstacle for people, or how do you deal with something like that?
It is an obstacle. When I would show up, people would say two things. Okay, nothing bad is going to happen now because Massello's here. And I had enough leverage, which was a key element of my success. I had enough leverage with the power brokers in the organization, where if I said nothing bad is going to happen here until we get this figured out, nobody was going to make a move to cause things to become any worse. When you look at an organization, though, you go, how many people actually have that kind of leverage or power that when they show up, everybody goes, oh, well, we better not do anything now.
Right.
Right. and has a reputation for, now everybody take a deep breath. Nobody's going to get fired. None of them bad's going to happen. Can somebody just walk me through what it is that got you here so we can figure out a road to get you out of here?
Yeah.
But it is a serious issue, because while it served the purpose of the organization because it fixed the immediate problem, it never really served the organization's purpose because it never fixed the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Very short-sighted. I wonder, the the old line goes something like, you can't fix the problem until you admit that you have it first. So, if you're looking at maybe a prescriptive, we're talking about what are the things leaders aren't doing. What's a good, litmus test for anyone listening, right now, to see if you did like a self audit? How do you know that this is probably a problem? Like, what would you look at doing an audit of a company?
Well, here, the very first thing we do is we do what we call our field observation. So we go in the field, and instead of walking in like we're the smartest people you've ever met, we come in with our notepad.
No, I just no, that's not true. No, we don't believe that.
We come in with a blank notepad and we go, look, the only way we're going to be able to figure out, even if we can help, is if you're willing to teach us what it is you want us to know, so we can understand this the way you want us to understand it. What happens too often in leadership situations, from sense of urgency or annoyance or both, that leader A shows up and says, looks around and goes, okay, I figured this out, and here's what we're going to do.
Right.
Now, it all sounds wonderful, right? And every TV program you watch where there's a fix-it person, that's what they do. They walk in, they have this sort of supernatural capability.
And they got the cape on and the tights, right? And the whole
right,
thing.
Exactly. But that's part of what I think came from my medical background, is that the people who taught me said, you have to show up and you have to let them teach you.
Mm-hmm.
That way you get to understand what they're really thinking and doing, because that's what they're leaning on. And if you don't figure that out, then your remedy will have a tough time really.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I'm imagining a scenario though, where a leader is sending in his fixers. And for me, the fixer image I have is Harvey Keitel from Pulp Fiction. But I'm sure there are other ones.
Well, that's a pretty severe one, but anyways, go ahead.
But, I'm imagining you're sort of, you're oscillating between, there's a problem, you send your fixer, there's a problem, you send your fixer, and you're just in this sort of infinite loop. And at some point, I guess what I'm looking for is what's the thing a leader would do to sort of step back and say, actually, we have a root cause problem here that we're not addressing. And it takes some awareness to do that. And, what are the things you think you'd advise someone to look at to say, maybe it is time to call guys like Dave or Vince?
One of the things we do right away is we also send people a form. It's a very simple log to understand what the people are doing that's moving their business ahead, and what are they doing that is actually addressing issues that should never have occurred. So that creates a great deal of awareness. Besides looking in the field with them, we're also helping them create self-awareness. And the prerequisite to that is, I think when you come across those people, Mike, who are wondering if they really have a problem, it's when they start looking at other measurements.
Okay.
They look at their profitability. A lot of times they get, they get hooked because profitability has gone down. Mm-hmm. And maybe other issues have shown up. They're not making budget, their sales are down, or they're losing a lot of people. So there's these symptoms that begin to occur that says there's something wrong here and I really don't know what it is. I mean, it's like going to the doctor and you say, I feel tired all the time. What does that mean? And that's when opening up to the diagnostics and being vulnerable to saying that there's something I can't fix and I don't know what it is.
Right.
But add to that, Vince, one of the ideas you offered back at the beginning of the conversation, that the leader positions themselves as the student in all of this, the learner. How do you go about learning something that you really don't yet know anything about? So what are the attributes and the behaviors of someone when they're in that learning mode? Now, we've all experienced that. Well, someplace in life, whether it was in academics or it was in sports or music or somewhere in our life experiences, we have used a very powerful way of being the student, to take in information, understand it from a variety of perspectives, manage our tendencies and our biases to discount the information because it comes from Vince or comes from Dave, and I don't really like Italians, so I don't really listen to them very much. It's a craziness how often we segregate out information and eliminate it without having first determined, is this useful to me? And what our contention is that you can actually teach someone how to use their own powerful learning mechanisms and do it on purpose as a way of helping them drive their leadership capabilities. And when you do that, you're going to learn how the other person is wired up. And that's what you're after, because that's what the person on the other side of your conversation is using, right?
Yeah. Do you think, is there a dissonance between the perceived how a CEO should show up and that sort of state of mind of being a learner? Like, do CEOs look at themselves and say, like, I shouldn't show up that way because it makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing, or like there's a problem with moving to that kind of mindset?
Do you remember the Ford turnaround where Edward Mullally, what was his name? Edward with Mullally was the guy's name?
Yeah, he came over from Boeing, didn't he, or something?
He came from Boeing.
Yeah.
One of the first things he did was, instead of going to the executive not washroom, but the executive cafeteria, he goes down to the regular cafeteria where everybody else was. He walks up to people, gets in line and says, "Hi, I'm the new CEO of Ford. What's wrong with this organization? What do we need to fix?" So the first thing he did was become a learner.
Yeah.
And then he got into the boardroom, well, not the boardroom, his executive team, and he asked them what's broken and what needs to be fixed. So I think and Ford was the only company that did not need a bailout,
right,
in the 2008.
Yeah.
Because they had thought through everything that they needed to. They had cash on hand. So the issue, I think, is that great leaders, we know, become learners. I wanted to add something too to what David just said. We call these kind of learning practices as performance maps. And what's very, very cool about them is we all have them. We learn or operate in a certain set of patterns that we use. These patterns can be captured, and they actually repeat in all aspects of a person's life. And the intensity may vary about how they're applied, but these performance maps, once we understand a performance map about an employee, so I'll say Dave is my boss and he understands my performance map, we can optimize that, use it to produce better results. Because if I work against my performance map, I can guarantee you I won't perform as well.
Interesting. Tell me more about a performance map. What would show up on that, and how would I use it?
All right. Well, let me give we have a great example from one of our clients.
Okay.
This particular individual was annoying her boss, her colleagues, by the way she treated them. Okay. So we went to her and began to ask her about how she performed, say, with her customers. And I said, would you treat the customers the same way you treat your internal people? She said, well, heaven's sakes, no, I would never do that. I'm kind to them. I said, what if you do? Right. What if you do if they're wrong? Yeah. Do you argue with them? Well, no. But I said, you argue with your boss? Yeah, but I won't argue with my customers. I'll try to convince them gently. And so we said, there's a performance map. She was using a less intensive map than she used with her peers, meaning she had just turned up the intensity. She would question her customers about when they were wrong, but she would never argue with them intensely, but she would with her peers and her boss. So I said, well, what if happens if you kind of tone things down and use what you use with your customers inside the house, so to speak? And she did. So that's a one small example of a performance map of somebody. We came across another individual who interrupted people all the time on a regular basis. In fact, I think it was one of her trademarks. It was probably on her business card. What do you think, Dave? It says, "Beware, I interrupt you."
Yeah, well, she was well known for it.
She was well known for it. And so Dave's working with her and says, well, tell me about how you listen to your kids. So she talks about her kids. Do you interrupt them? She said, no, I don't interrupt them. Why would I interrupt them? I said, well, you do that everywhere else. No, you can't do that with my kids. Otherwise, they'd never tell me anything. And then she went, oh, I wonder if I would use that with my employees, my customers.
Right.
And she started using that. But there's another pattern she knew in another area. Actually, interrupting is a pattern. It's just a matter of how much you use it. And sometimes it's appropriate.
Right.
In fact, the change was so dramatic. One of our customers said, are you ill or something? Are you not feeling well? These things are organic. They can happen quickly. And good leaders help employees to be able to take their patterns, performance patterns, and optimize them. And we do that every time. We teach leaders how to do that.
Well, so we talked about things leaders aren't doing. We talked about diverting. We talked about learning. We touched on apprenticeship a little bit. You want to talk more about how that builds on those other two concepts?
So staying in the same client example that Vince offered, when this individual hit the revelation that she actually had multiple ways of interrupting and that she could on her own decide which ones served her purpose in any situation and pick and choose from her skill set. We call that calibration, right? Interrupting is a skill. So do I interrupt a lot? Do I interrupt a little? Do I interrupt only at this moment and then back away and not? We take that individual, teach them our techniques, and then apprentice them in the application of it to people around them. So she took one of her people and did what we taught her how to do. And we apprenticed the learning and the application of the technique. Now, we built the technique on her map. So our technique is very simple. What happens is that we actually we attach it into or incorporate into the map she's taught us about how she operates. So she never has to worry about being us. That would be very, very difficult training, right? And in this case, she goes and she uses it with one of her people. She comes back. So she'll go run that conversation, come back and talk to us. In that debriefing conversation with us, she's saying, you know something, I have wondered about this for a long time, what made this person tick. And suddenly I understand in one conversation that she doesn't think like me. Now, that's a common issue, right? That's just human, right? We get into a conversation like the three of us, and it's easy to presume we're all thinking the same way. It's not true. So the apprentice component is designed to help the person we started with now take the skills and go downstream from them or even upstream from them. And with one of these clients, we're running an experiment to go a second level downstream. So we're going to train up and the person we started with on how to now turn around and teach the person they're working with and apprentice them to apply it downstream. Thus, the organization gets this build because, you know, the hierarchy of leadership, right? We're starting at the partner level. So next down is senior leadership. Next down is middle management. Next down is all the up and comings. And that's the layer we're after.
Hmm.
So it doesn't do you any good to train up just that top tier, because guess what you've created? A bunch of rescue people.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
You know, I'm curious, maybe to kind of to put a button on all this. What are the kinds of things you might expect having successfully put a program like this in place? Like, what are some of the big wins and stories you can tell about when this really worked?
So one of the things we're after is that, remember that measurement of diversion of time that we talked about way back at the beginning,
Mhm.
that would go down, because we can go back in and measure it repeatedly to see if by doing this, we've actually caused the person who is at the top of the food chain to have to divert less and less of their time. Now, the benefit, of course, is you get throughput, because your productivity goes up, your error rates go down as you drive competency up. And by doing that, you just get more production out of the same dollar investment in people. And you don't have this rework component that's dragging resource away from pushing the ROI, the reason you're doing the work in the first place. So remember, we start off with a field assessment. So we've gone and figured out, because you've taught us, if we were in the field with you, you've taught us what are all the situations you're dealing with, what gets in your way, what are the things that you have to fight through, what stops you from getting. And we already have all of those set up as metrics that we can go back and field observe again. Well, how? By being able to do what I just described, did we shift some of that around for you so that that is all working more effectively? It really is an ROI outcome we're after, not just a feel good or people saying, you know, I feel better about coming to work. I mean, that's wonderful. But feeling better that doesn't produce ROI is not what any of us are after in the business community.
Go, Vince, I was going to ask you, like, if there's a way to put like a, you know, if you were going to predict, what are the kinds of things you think you could look forward in time and say, having put this in place, here are some of the things that we might be able to look at in the future?
You mean in terms of outcomes from this?
Yeah, outcomes,
this
measurements, something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things, let me step back a second here, and that there is the training that most organizations do, and then there's the business results that occur, and there's this block about how do you actually convert that training into business outcomes. So you're looking at things like, has profitability gone up? Because if you're increasing efficiency and effectiveness, you are going to be able to do more with less resources. So you want to look at that. You also want to look at employee engagement. We highly recommend that people do the Gallup engagement survey, the Q12. It's one of the most powerful, robust, well-normed instruments, and it is highly predictive of other things like profitability, customer satisfaction, safety, retention of employees. So downstream, what we should be seeing from all of this is all of those measurement pieces. Now, the typical issue is, how do you draw the string between what we did and what out to this ROI piece or to employee engagement pieces? And I think it's the same thing that the Gallup organization faces too when they talk about engagement. How do you draw the string between engagement and profitability? Now, what they've done, though, is you look at companies that have high engagement and they actually produce more. So there is a predictive value from their statistical analysis. So what we are doing is looking at, we are looking at engagement. So we should see that, and then we should then see all of those other pieces that come from it. Like I said, profitability, sales increases, customer satisfaction increases.
Yeah.
So that's one of the quick ways to get a measurement about where we start and where we're ending up. And then we have the statistical prediction of a very strong prediction of increasing profitability and performance.
And one item that we pick up on in all of our engagements is turnover.
That's a great one. It's so costly on so many levels,
isn't it? So, and what happens is the more turnover you have to absorb, you are unintentionally dumbing down the workforce, because all the newbies who come in, right, don't yet know what it is they need to do. And it's a drain on the rest of the organization because
Yep.
you are compensating, you're spending time, as Vince pointed out earlier, to train them, and you're compensating for the fact that they can't yet do the work.
Yeah.
So what we found when we find this all through our client base, but just one example, they were losing 70% of their new people, college grads, well-educated engineers. They were losing 70% of them at the 2-year mark. Not uncommon, millennial issue,
Yeah.
or whoever they are, right? And so they asked us, can you figure out how this is happening? What might be driving it? So keeping with our methods, we go in the field. And here's what we find, that if you were assigned to a particular office, you stood a huge opportunity of being with the firm at 5 years of work. If you went to a different office, you were gone in under 18 months.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. So
And
what
the
was the difference?
difference in the two was that the leadership in the first office used a mentor apprentice. Come with me, I'm going to show you what to do, and I'm going to stay with you until you demonstrate competency. In the other office, it was the deep end of the pool model. I'm going to show you what to do, and then you're going to go and do it, and then I'm going to do the old, okay, you didn't do this right. You should have done this more. Why don't you go back here and there and try it again, without training you?
Yeah.
And when Vince and I looked at the exit interviews of the engineers who had left, 80% of them cited training as the reason they left. But the training they talked about wasn't the training of being an engineer. Remember, they already came out of engineering school.
Right.
The training was, how do I succeed and grow in this company? And that's what they weren't being taught. And they knew it, so they left. It wasn't even that they were fired. They just took themselves out.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So
well-
that's a big measurement goal for us too, is to reduce any kind of attrition that's sitting out there. Why is it happening? And help do the training and development of people that we need to get them up to.
That's beautiful. Well, guys, thanks for the insights today. I'll put links in the video below and on the podcast if people want to follow up and hear more about that. But it was a pleasure. Thanks for going through those 3 top things with me.
Thank you. This was fun.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
Hey there, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more content just like that.